Cars splashed through the narrow streets, their headlights cutting golden streaks through the fog. People rushed by, umbrellas tilted, collars up, eyes fixed ahead. No one seemed to notice the cold anymore. Maybe they had grown used to it, or maybe they had just stopped feeling it. David held his daughter's hand tightly as they made their way down the wet sidewalk. Her little red shoes slapped against the pavement, the rubber soles squeaking slightly with each step. She had insisted on wearing them, even though he'd reminded her it would rain, because they had been her mother's last gift before things had changed. He hadn't had the heart to say no. "Daddy, can we take the long way?" she asked, tilting her face up toward him, the hood of her yellow raincoat slipping back slightly. He smiled and nodded, even though it meant 10 more minutes in the cold. Her face still held that kind of joy that only children knew how to carry. Maybe the long walk would tire her out. Maybe it would distract her from the empty seat at dinner, the one she never asked about but always glanced at. They passed the bakery where they used to go as a family on Saturday mornings. The windows were fogged, and the scent of fresh bread crept out from the door each time someone opened it. Her head turned toward it instinctively. David gently tugged her hand and they kept walking, then she stopped. It wasn't a stumble or a playful pause. It was a complete, sudden stop. Her gaze was fixed across the street, toward the alleyway between the pharmacy and the laundromat. David followed her eyes. That's when he saw her. A woman sat huddled against the brick wall, soaked from head to toe. Her hair was matted, dark strands clinging to her cheeks. Her coat was nothing more than a bundle of fabric, torn, too thin for the season. One hand was tucked beneath her body, the other wrapped tightly around her knees. She looked down, not at them. Not at anything, just down. David gently pulled his daughter's hand again, trying to guide her forward. But she didn't move. "Daddy," she whispered, barely loud enough over the rain. "Why is she sitting there?" "She's just waiting, honey. Come on, it's cold." But his daughter took a step closer to the edge of the sidewalk. The wind caught the corner of her coat and flung it upward. "She didn't notice. She looks cold," she said. David didn't answer right away. He looked at the woman again, this time more carefully. She was thin, pale, soaked to the bone. There was something hollow in the way she curled into herself, like she was trying to disappear completely. "Let's keep walking," he said, more gently now. "Daddy," he turned to her. Her eyes were wide. There was a quiver in her lip. Not from the cold, but something else, something deeper. Then came the question, why are we not helping her? David froze. The question hit him harder than he expected. He didn't know how to answer, not right away. He looked down at her, her innocence, her curiosity, her unfiltered humanity, and felt something twist in his chest. How do you tell your child that you're afraid to help? That you've learned to walk past people like that? That the world has taught you not to get involved? He knelt down beside her. The rain soaked into the knees of his jeans, but he didn't care. "It's complicated," he said softly. "Sometimes people, they end up in hard places, and sometimes we don't know how to help. But we could ask," she said, her voice almost breaking. "We could ask her." He looked back toward the alley. The woman hadn't moved. The cars kept splashing by, the world still turning. He looked into his daughter's eyes, and in that moment, something old and tired inside him broke apart. Maybe it was guilt, maybe it was shame, or maybe it was just the truth spoken by a child who still believed the world could be kind. "Okay," he said, standing, "let's ask." She smiled, just a little, and took his hand again, and together they crossed the street. The rain was lighter now, more of a whisper than a downpour, but the cold still lingered in the air. David held his daughter's hand a little tighter as they stepped onto the curb opposite the alley. His heart was thudding, and he didn't know exactly why. Maybe it was fear, maybe it was discomfort, or maybe it was because he was about to do something he hadn't done in a very long time, something real. The woman still hadn't moved. She didn't even glance up as they approached. Her knees were drawn tightly to her chest, and her shoulders trembled beneath the soaked coat. Her skin looked almost gray in the streetlight. Her lips, pale and cracked, moved slightly as if she were whispering something only she could hear. David hesitated just a few steps away. His daughter looked up at him, her eyes searching his face, waiting for him to speak first. He cleared his throat gently. "Excuse me," he said, his voice low, unsure. "Ma'am, are you okay?" The woman didn't look up. She flinched slightly, maybe from his voice, maybe from the cold. "Do you need help?" he asked again. Still nothing, just a shiver. The girl let go of his hand and took a step closer. David instinctively reached for her, but she stopped just beyond his reach. Then his daughter knelt down. She was small, only 7, but in that moment, she seemed braver than him. She pulled her hood back and looked directly at the woman. "My name's Emma," she said. "We were walking home. You look cold." The woman's head moved slightly. Her eyes, hollow and distant, flicked toward the little girl for a second. Just one, but it was enough. Emma turned to her father and tugged at his coat. "Daddy, can we give her something, please?" David looked at the woman again. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a granola bar, the kind Emma always asked for but never finished. He knelt beside his daughter and held it out. The woman's hand moved slowly, shakily. She took the bar without a word, eyes still averted. Emma sat down beside her on the edge of the curb, her small hands folded in her lap. Her red shoes, now wet and smudged, dangled just above the gutter. "Daddy," she asked quietly, "why are we helping her?" The question came again, just like before, but now it was more than a moment of curiosity. There was weight in her voice, the kind that begged for understanding. David didn't answer right away. He looked down at his daughter, then at the woman beside her. He hadn't expected this question to linger. He thought she'd ask it, forget it, and move on. But children didn't forget like adults did. They remembered the silences too. He sat down slowly beside Emma, the cold seeping through his clothes. The rain tapped gently on their shoulders. "Because," he began, his voice low, "when someone is hurting, we don't just walk away." Emma tilted her head. "But why is she here, Daddy? Why doesn't she have a house like we do?" He exhaled. "Sometimes life doesn't go the way we plan. People lose their homes, their families, sometimes they lose everything. And when that happens, they need someone to remind them they're not invisible." Emma was quiet for a moment, then she whispered like Mommy. David's breath caught in his throat. He didn't expect her to say it. He hadn't spoken about her in months, not since the accident. He had thought keeping quiet was protecting Emma. But children noticed, even when they didn't speak, even when their questions were tucked away behind silent glances. "Yes," he finally said, his voice shaking, like Mommy. "She always helped people remember." Emma nodded, slowly. David turned back to the woman, who now held the granola bar in both hands, staring at it as if it were made of gold. Tears clung to her lashes, though her face showed no emotion, just quiet, tired pain. "You see," David continued, "helping someone isn't about fixing everything. Sometimes it's just about letting them know they matter." Emma looked at him again, a little light blooming in her eyes. "Do you think she knows now?" "I hope so." Emma stood up and reached into her coat pocket, pulling out a small, worn drawing. It was a crayon sketch of her dad, and her mom holding hands under a sun. She hesitated, then bent down and gently placed it beside the woman. The woman looked at it for a long time. Then, for the first time, she smiled just a little, and David felt something in his chest he hadn't felt in a long while. He had come out into the rain to get home. The bell above the cafe door jingled as David pushed it open, the warmth from inside rushing out to greet them. The scent of fresh coffee and baked bread curled into the air like a comforting sigh. Emma stepped in first, her soaked red shoes squeaking with each step, and behind her came the woman, silent, hesitant, almost unsure if she was really welcome. David held the door for her and nodded reassuringly. She gave him a small glance, more a flick of the eyes than anything, and shuffled inside. The waitress behind the counter looked up, did a quick scan of the three of them, and said nothing. David gave her a polite nod, steering the group toward a quiet booth near the back, away from the windows where the rain still fell. The woman sat stiffly, like someone unused to chairs. Emma slid in beside her father and leaned her chin on her hands, eyes never leaving the woman across from her. Her curiosity wasn't rude, it was gentle, like she was trying to understand something her young heart didn't yet have the words for. David raised a hand to the waitress. "Could we get 3 hot chocolates, please, and something warm to eat? Anything's fine." The woman blinked slowly, her fingers trembling as she wrapped them around the napkin dispenser. Her lips parted like she might object, but no words came. Instead, she looked down at the table as if it might swallow her whole. Emma swung her legs under the table. "What's your name?" she asked softly. There was a pause, a long one. Then the woman said barely above a whisper, "Hope." Emma's face lit up. "That's a pretty name." Hope gave a small, almost involuntary laugh. It was hoarse and brief, like it hadn't been used in a long time. "I suppose it used to be," she murmured, eyes flicking to the window. David watched her carefully. She looked older than she probably was. Her skin was weathered, her hands calloused, and there was a weariness in her eyes that couldn't be measured by years. Still, there was something fragile in her face, something broken, but not completely lost. The waitress came and set down 3 mugs of hot chocolate. Emma thanked her immediately and blew on hers, while Hope stared at hers as though it might vanish if she touched it. Finally, with great care, she brought the mug to her lips and took a small sip. Her eyes closed just for a second. "I used to be a teacher," she said, her voice faint like she was confessing a secret. "2nd grade before everything." Emma tilted her head. "What happened?" David opened his mouth, ready to gently redirect the question, but Hope held up a hand, no anger, just quiet acceptance. "It's all right," she said. "She has a right to ask." She took another sip before continuing. "My husband passed away 6 years ago, a car accident. We had a little girl, Emily, she was 5. Emma's hands stopped moving on the mug. David could feel the tightness in his throat return. "She got sick not long after," Hope went on. "A rare condition. We fought it for 2 years. Hospital visits, specialists, pills I couldn't pronounce. I lost my job trying to keep up with it all. Then I lost our house. Then I lost her." Silence fell over the table like a heavy blanket. Even Emma didn't know what to say. "I didn't have anyone after that," Hope said, looking down into her mug. "No family left, no savings, just a name and a box of her things. I tried shelters, but they were always full. I just stopped trying after a while." Emma reached across the table, her tiny hand covering Hope's. Hope looked up, startled, but she didn't pull away. "I'm sorry," Emma said quietly. Hope gave her a long, searching look. "You don't have to be, but I am," Emma said. No one should be all alone. David had to look away for a moment. The emotion in his daughter's voice was too raw, too pure. Hope wiped at her cheek quickly, as if embarrassed to be crying in front of them. "I didn't think anyone noticed me anymore," she said. "Most people don't even look." David finally found his voice. "She did," he said, nodding toward Emma. "She always sees people." Hope smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. The smallest, most fragile piece of her seemed to mend right there, over hot chocolate and the touch of a child's hand. For the first time in a long while, she looked like someone who remembered what it felt like to be human again. The cafe had grown quieter as the evening deepened. A few customers remained scattered at their tables, heads buried in books or phones. The low hum of conversation replaced by the gentle clinking of dishes behind the counter. Outside, the rain had softened to a drizzle, its rhythm tapping lightly against the windows. Hope sat still in the corner of the booth, her hands wrapped tightly around the now empty mug, as if the warmth inside might last a little longer if she held on hard enough. She hadn't said much since she told them her story. She didn't need to. The silence felt sacred now, not awkward. Heavy with meaning, Emma reached into the inside pocket of her yellow raincoat. She pulled something out carefully, as if it were fragile. A small pink coat, puffy, with little silver hearts embroidered on the sleeves. She smoothed it out on her lap and looked up at her father. David's heart immediately tightened. He knew that coat. He remembered the day they had bought it, the last time he and Emma's mother had gone shopping as a family. It had been too big back then, sleeves rolling over her hands. but Emma had insisted on wearing it anyway, calling it her magic coat, because it made her feel like a superhero. David opened his mouth to say something, unsure what exactly, to remind her it was special, to ask if she was sure, but the words caught in his throat. Emma turned to Hope and gently pushed the coat across the table. "You can have this," she said softly. "It's warm, and you don't have one." Hope blinked at her, stunned. "Oh, sweetheart, no, I can't. That's your coat. You need it?" Emma shook her head. "I don't need it as much as you do." Hope's hands trembled as she touched the coat. It was soft, dry, and still smelled faintly of lavender from the last wash. She looked at David, tears welling in her eyes again. "I can't take something so important from her." David swallowed hard, but his voice was calm when he spoke. "She's not giving it away because she has to. She's giving it because she wants to." Hope didn't speak right away. Her fingers brushed the silver hearts on the sleeves, her expression unreadable, a mixture of awe, pain, and something like disbelief. "I had a coat like this once," she murmured, half to herself. Emily's coat. She loved it so much. Pink with a hood just like this. She wore it until the elbows thinned out and the zipper broke. Emma smiled. "Then maybe she'd want you to wear this one." Hope laughed through her tears, a raw, grateful sound. "Maybe she would." She slid the coat on slowly. It fit snugly, wrapping around her like a long, lost memory. The sleeves were a little short, but it didn't matter. For the first time since David had seen her, she didn't look cold. Emma scooted closer in the booth, nestling against her father's side. "Mommy said coats aren't just for keeping warm. They're for making people feel safe." David looked down at her, the ache in his chest spreading like fire. His wife had said that once on a snowy morning when Emma had refused to wear hers. He hadn't heard those words in so long, and now out of nowhere, they returned to him through their daughter's mouth like a whisper from the past. Hope smiled at Emma with glassy eyes. "Your mommy sounds like she was a beautiful person." "She was," Emma said proudly. "And really brave." Hope nodded slowly, pulling the coat around herself as though it might help her hold on to the memory of that kind of love, the kind that gives even when it hurts. A deep stillness settled over the table, not sad, not empty, just full with things that couldn't be said but didn't need to be. The waitress returned and refilled their mugs without a word, sensing perhaps that this wasn't the moment to speak. David met her eyes and gave a slight, grateful nod. Hope sipped the second cup with both hands this time, no longer hiding her tears. They flowed freely now, but without shame. Emma reached up and patted her hand gently. "You're not alone now." Hope didn't answer. She just closed her eyes, held the warm mug tight, and let herself believe it, even if only for one night. The rain had stopped entirely by the time they stepped out of the cafe. The street glistened under the yellow glow of the lamps, puddles reflecting the softened night sky. The world was quieter now, the rush of the evening having slowed to a gentle stillness. There was a strange peace in the air, the kind that comes after something important has happened. Hope stood just outside the cafe door, the pink coat snug around her. Her hands were tucked inside the sleeves, and she looked almost unsure of what to do next, as though stepping back into the world felt foreign after the safety of that booth. David noticed her glance around, not nervously, but thoughtfully, as if the world looked different to her now. Emma stood beside her father, her small hand tucked into his, and her head tilted back to look up at Hope. "Do you have somewhere to sleep tonight?" she asked gently. Hope hesitated. "I was going to go back to the shelter line. Sometimes they have space, sometimes not." David felt a pang deep in his chest. He looked up the street, then down, then back at Hope. "There's a community center near our neighborhood," he said. "They take people in. It's not far. I can drive you there." Hope's eyes softened again, but this time she didn't cry. Instead, she nodded. "Thank you, really?" As they began walking toward the car, Emma reached out and took Hope's hand, like it was the most natural thing in the world. David didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He could feel the weight of the moment settling around them like a warm blanket. At the car, Hope hesitated before getting in. "Are you sure?" she asked David quietly, glancing down at Emma, who was already buckling her seatbelt. "This isn't too much." David shook his head. "You gave her something tonight. You let her see the power of her kindness. That's not too much. That's everything." The ride was quiet, but not uncomfortable. The city passed by in blurred lights and shadows, and Hope stared out the window, as if trying to memorize every passing streetlight, every sign, every moment. Emma leaned her head against her father's arm and yawned softly, the kind of yawn that meant sleep wasn't far. The community center was modest, a low brick building tucked behind a church. A soft yellow light illuminated the steps, and a volunteer stood just inside the door, clipboard in hand. David parked and stepped out, then walked around to open the door for Hope. She got out slowly, the pink coat brushing against her legs, and looked up at the building. "I haven't been here in a long time," she said. "It used to feel like giving up, but now it feels like a start." David smiled. Sometimes helping someone doesn't fix everything, but it can be the beginning of something better. Hope turned to Emma and knelt down. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling. "You reminded me that people still care, that kindness still exists. You saved me tonight." Emma wrapped her arms around her without hesitation. "I'm glad we helped you," she whispered. Hope hugged her back tightly. Then she stood, nodded once at David, and walked slowly toward the door of the shelter. She didn't look back, but they watched until she disappeared inside. As David buckled Emma back into her seat and started the car again, the night felt lighter somehow. The darkness hadn't gone, but it wasn't as heavy. They drove in silence for a while. Then, as they turned onto their street, Emma spoke softly. "Daddy, do you think she'll be okay now?" David looked at her through the rear-view mirror. "I think she's going to try, and sometimes that's the bravest thing someone can do." Emma nodded sleepily. She looked different when she wore the coat, like she remembered who she was. David smiled. "Yeah, I think she did." He pulled into the driveway, parked, and walked around to lift Emma into his arms. She wrapped her arms around his neck and rested her head on his shoulder. "I'm glad we didn't walk past her," she murmured. "Me too," he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. As they entered the quiet house, the warmth of the moment lingered. There was no fanfare, no dramatic ending. Just a father, a daughter, and the quiet knowledge that a simple act of kindness had changed not just someone else's life, but their own. Sometimes, the biggest answers come not in loud declarations, but in soft voices, gentle hands, and the courage to ask, "Why not help?" And sometimes, all it takes to change the world is a little girl in red shoes, a coat with silver hearts, and a question that refuses to be ignored.